and how the rulemaking, the online application, the actual print PDF. Donna, were you referring to the PDF or the online?
The online application I was looking at.
Okay, you're looking at the online. Okay. Francis, how's it going? You want to put something in the chat? We can't hear you.
She's muted.
Yeah, I'm not sure why she's muted. She has to call someone, I guess, to unmute her. Very strange. I don't think I'm the host.
It says that Wendy is the host, so maybe there's some issue with that.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I did receive something about that, so I wonder.
Hi, folks. Can you hear me? This is Gagan.
Yes, can hear you. Just fine.
Yeah. Francis's her Cisco actual web system is malfunctioning. Her screen's freezing up. I'm going to try to share the PowerPoint from my end. Give me 1 second. Can folks see it?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. How do you start it? Right, sure.
Okay. Much better.
Awesome. Thank you. Give me 1 second. Hi, Francis. Folks, I just called in Francis. She's on speaker. Let me know if you can hear us.
I can.
It's not very, the audio quality is not working too well.
Yeah.
Yeah, is there a way that Francis can call directly into the meeting instead of calling on a phone on speaker?
That's a really good suggestion. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Mark. She's going to do that. Thank you.
I'm just looking for.
I don't know WebEx as well as I know Zoom, so I would be more helpful if I could.
No, that was a great suggestion.
So has anyone been through a process of rulemaking at the city? Anyone?
Sure.
Okay, so you're familiar with the steps.
Yeah, they're not that different than the federal and the state procedures in general.
What kinds of rules have you been involved in?
On the city level, the Landmarks Preservation Commission somewhat drastically revised its rules about, 3-4 years ago. And it actually went through, so it has the public hearing process and the posting process. And they actually took so many comments from the public process that effectively they re-noticed the whole proposed rulemaking text, so that they, in effect, they went through the process twice.
Okay. So as you all heard, we are going to be doing another public hearing on this rule, and there are a series of steps, which when Frances gets on, hopefully she can explain, but the basic overview is that we have to go through a process of getting the proposed rule, reviewed and certified for posting. The Mayor's Office of Operations and the Law Department review the proposed rule. They okay it for posting. We then have to post it, and it has to be up for 30 days for comment. And then we have to hold a public hearing on it. And at that point, after that, the rule gets revised. It will get reviewed and revised if needed. And potentially, it has to go through the internal review process again. And then it gets, the final version will get posted. So, Duggan, do you have any update on Frances?
I just messaged her to see if she was able to log on if she needs. I think she was. We have a call user 3 now on. We just need to make sure that we give her access to speak.
How do we do that? Who does that?
The person who is the host. So the Wendy Troll that is the host right now on WebEx.
Who's that?
That was Frances's machine.
Okay, let me replay.
I think what I'm going to ask you to do, Duggan, if you don't mind, I'll ask someone else on the team to handle what's going on with that, but can you just go right into the rule, please?
Of course.
Thank you.
Hi folks, it's so wonderful to see you all today. I know you can't see me yet. I'll show up in a little bit in the meeting. So what we're doing is we are proposing a rule setting forth minimum standards and training requirements for individuals who provide interpreter assistance for limited English proficient voters through the Commission's Full Site Language Assistance Program. And Sarah briefly talked through the CAPA process, and Frances really wanted to provide a more thorough review of this entire process. So like Sarah said, we draft the rule, we notify the public once we publish the rule on our website. We hold a public hearing. After the revision process, we publish the final rule. The final rule is then adopted and becomes law. The timeline that we're working with on the proposed rule is on May 25th, 2020, we will publish the proposed rule on the CEC website. And once we publish the rule, the 30-day public comment period starts. On June 17th, 2020, CEC is organizing a stakeholder roundtable, during which we will garner feedback and notes on both the rule and the training content that was previously utilized by the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs in order to take into consideration everyone's feedback and change the content prior to using it for the November 2020 general election. And there were some folks who participated in the public hearing for the full site language assistance methodology who expressed interest in reviewing and offering comment on the training content itself. So we will be reaching out to a lot of the folks who were involved with the initial public hearing to make sure the folks who expressed interest at the time continue with us during this process. And on June 30th, 2020, we will hold a public hearing on the proposed rule. Oh, in addition, one thing I forgot to mention is that the Language Assistance Advisory Committee will also be sent the training content, and then we will facilitate discussion during our last meeting to garner their feedback and their input as well. This will provide the Commission sufficient time to take these notes into consideration and to incorporate the feedback into the interpreter training, like I said, prior to the November general election. And that is our timeline. Now to jump into the proposed rule document that was shared with folks ahead of time, we will do a brief overview of the proposed rule. Section 3202 of the Charter directs the Commission to promulgate rules establishing the minimum standards. So we're establishing the floor and training requirements for interpreters under the Full Sight Language Assistance Program. The proposed rule requires interpreters to be fluent in English and the language to be served. They must comply with all lawful orders from the staff of the New York City Board of Elections. They must observe the prohibition on electioneering and ensure voter privacy. The proposed rule requires that the Commission provides at least one training for such individuals prior to each election event and establishes minimum requirements for the content of all Commission training. So when we say that it establishes minimum requirements for the content, the minimum requirements for the content are the training must include ethical guidance for interpreters that will include the standards of conduct. I will go over that in the next slide. It must also include a process for tracking the number of voters the interpreters serve and establish a protocol for collecting and reporting public complaints regarding the program. Interpreters shall comply with the following standards of conduct. They must comply with all lawful orders from the staff of the BOE, including but not limited to making an oath or signing an affirmation as required by Section 8-306 of the New York State election law. They cannot engage in electioneering in the polling place within 100 feet of the polling place or while assisting voters telephonically. And when we say electioneering, we're defining that as words, communications, actions, or general course of conduct that seeks to further the success or failure of a particular candidate, party, ticket, or ballot question, or intended to persuade or induce a voter to vote or refrain from voting for any particular candidate, party, ticket, or ballot question. They must not place a mark on any ballot or do any other act in connection with the ballot with the intent that it may be identified as a ballot cast by a particular voter. They must not directly or indirectly reveal to any person the name of any particular candidate, party, ticket, or ballot question voted for by a voter. They must comply with all applicable laws, including Articles 8 and 17 of the New York State election law. Article 8 codifies conduct requirements for election inspectors, and Article 17 outlines behaviors and actions that are deemed as a violation of election law, which includes acts like electioneering. They must comply with the following ethical standards for professional interpreters adapted from the National Council on Healthcare Interpreter Certification's Code of Ethics for Healthcare Interpreters. The first being confidentiality. The interpreter will regard all information obtained during the performance of their professional duties as confidential. Impartiality. The interpreter will perform their duties in an impartial way, refraining from advising, counseling, or conveying personal biases or beliefs. Accuracy. The interpreter will strive to relay all information accurately in the course of their professional duties, preserving the spirit of the original message, taking into consideration its cultural context. Professionalism. The interpreter will at all times act in a professional and ethical manner, maintaining the boundaries of the professional role and abstaining from personal involvement. So we just reviewed the crux of the proposed rule. In order to ease understanding of the proposed rule, we plan on sharing a plain language version, facilitate participation and discussion by folks with limited legalese knowledge like myself, just to make sure that this document is accessible enough for folks to offer comment. Do folks have any questions? No questions?
Does everyone have a basic?
Actually, if I could,
Yep.
the definition of electioneering that was included in the materials that I received by email, which I believe is the same one we just saw on the screen, was that taken from somewhere? Is there a statute someplace that defines that?
I can take a question to our law department, to Kwame, who drafted the rule, and I can raise it to him and get back to you.
Yeah, my point is, there is a law that prevents electioneering. And we all know it because every time you go to vote, you see that little placard. What I would want, what I hope is that this definition is that definition, because I wouldn't want to have competing definitions for, in effect, the same conduct. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Of course.
Other questions?
When
Did someone have?
well, what's the?
Mark, can I jump in with a quick question?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I'm tinkering. Go ahead.
I just wanted to understand the cultural, what was the wording around, try and interpret it, I'm paraphrasing. Try and interpret it closely as it is written.
Amy, maybe it's it. Preserving the spirit of the original message, taking into consideration.
You went on mute.
Hold on. Amy, are you talking about the phrase preserving the spirit of the original message, taking into consideration its cultural context?
Yeah, can you just explain to me what that means and how that would work?
Absolutely. So those standards are taken from the National Council on Healthcare Interpreter Certification Code of Ethics, and so when it says that they will strive to relay all information accurately in the course of their professional duties, preserving the spirit of the original message, taking into consideration of cultural context, I read that as there is some when providing when interpreting.
Put your eyes on something.
Sorry.
Yeah, I just asked everyone to be on mute if you're not speaking.
I was just saying that outlines interpreters are interpreting information to the voter. It's important to relay the information in context, and that these are rooted with healthcare interpreters, making sure that they're relaying information to folks.
Everyone, I'm going to please ask you to mute yourself. Right now we're having an issue with the hosting of this meeting, and whoever is the host, as we try to figure that out, needs to put everyone on mute. But if you can't do that, the host can't do that, please just mute yourself.
I tried that natural peanut butter that we have, and it's actually quite good.
It's great to hear about.
I'd like some peanut butter.
We were all on mute, and then we got unmuted.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem here. Function is not working too well, but sorry, Gagan, would you like to continue?
All I was saying was that it's important to convey that the original message was decision, and it's important to take into consideration the larger context of the message. This is especially important when relaying healthcare information, which is why it's codified for healthcare interpreters. But we think it's important for interpreters when sharing information with voters that often if you're translating information directly, it may not make as much sense directly as it does if you interpret it with the context of the situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I completely understand that. It's written in a way that the language was a little fuzzy for me. I mean, when you think about translation and the fact that you can't do a one-to-one translation, that I would understand. It's just the way they use cultural, whatever the exact language was. It just hit me as an interesting way to phrase it. That's all.
Yeah, I hear you, and that is something that we should consider because we want this to be precise enough that when you read it, it makes what I just shared makes sense. We'll take that into consideration.
Yeah, may I jump in now? Because I actually had pretty much the same reaction, if you will, that Amy was trying to raise, or Amy did raise, that I was trying to raise. I was actually looking at the next one, which is professionalism. And professionalism can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people as well. I accept that it comes from this National Council on Healthcare Interpreter Certification Code. I just wonder, is that a universal standard or a reasonably respected standard? I'm confessing my ignorance here, so please don't take it as an accusation, but as an inquiry. Is that how other contexts try to get at this issue? Because I completely get the issue that you want accurate, fair, impartial, and respectful interpretation services provided. And truthfully, I would like to see the word respectful put in there somewhere, although it is in the spirit of the other four that you've laid out. I'm just wondering, is that the universal or widely accepted standard? Is there another? I'm wondering, for example, since we're in the realm of voting, what standards are typically used when there's interpretation services in a criminal proceeding? If that is the same standard as this, then I'm going to feel a lot more comfortable with this, because because of the obvious concerns about what somebody's options and so forth are. Can you speak to that? I'm sorry I'm mumbling on about this, but I'm trying to get at a somewhat amorphous concern.
No, I hear you, and I understand what you're saying. So the reason that this was suggested to be added in is the Officer Interpreter Certification is one of the few, if not only, code of ethics that are codified and set out. A lot of other interpretation, a lot of other folks that do training for interpreters or translators, they rely on this baseline model. There aren't necessarily, when we were doing research and looking into this with the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, there are not other codified standards that are set. There are standards that other organizations use, but they're not codified or well known like this one. But I can circle back with the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs and see if I can provide you additional information.
Okay, so thank you for that. And if there's some way to incorporate the concept of respect for the person for whom translation services are being provided, I accept that it's in the spirit of what's being said there, but since this is a brand new rulemaking opportunity and not an existing document, if there's a way in another paragraph to include that concept, I think that's very much the spirit of what we're all intending.
Mark, can I just ask you to clarify a little bit where it says the interpreter will at all times act in a respectful and ethical manner? Do you want to see the word respectful added in there?
Where are you reading, Sarah? I'm not reading the same place.
It's under accuracy where it says professionalism. Under the part about cultural context, it says the interpreter will at all times act in a professional and ethical manner.
Yeah.
Maintaining the boundaries of the professional role.
I would be perfectly happy with it to be added there. My problem is that I don't want to engraft upon the National Council standards a word that they don't adopt. So if we're using that as a benchmark, I don't want to misrepresent what that benchmark is.
I see. Okay. So you're saying to me, if we don't want to go that route of, deviating from those standards, to add something else to this, like a 5 or something, after professionalism, add something like respect or somewhere else in the document, I guess?
One place you could do it is that in number 6, that introduces the National Council on Healthcare Interpreter Certification Code of Ethics. So at the top, before the Romanet 1 through 4, you could say something like that, preserving or paying due respect, or being respectful of the recipient of the interpretation services, or the client of the recipient of the, somewhere in there the phrase could be added. Or it could be its own little sub-paragraph somewhere else. I just would like to see that concept incorporated.
Can you just say a little bit more about what you are looking for in adding that? I know it's probably obvious, but I just would love to hear a little bit more about what you're looking for in terms of respect.
Sure. In criminal contexts, and I don't do criminal law that much, but in criminal contexts, there's been a lot of rolling of the eyes and harumphing about somebody who needs translation services, and inevitably leads to delay and so forth. And the spirit of what we are about with translation services is to make everyone feel on an equal footing. And so what I would hope is that the request and the performance of the translation services would be performed in a way that does not diminish that does not give the impression of being disrespected to the person who's requesting those services.
Okay. That's helpful. Does anyone else want to add anything to this? Or have any other questions?
Hi, it's Lillian. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Oh, hi, it's Lillian. I just wanted to say, as a certified interpreter and translator, years ago, I don't do it when I was in school. When you take these classes and you are given the certification, a lot of this language that we're discussing is part of the license. So if we're already going through a professional that's licensed to do this work, it's a little bit assumed that a lot of this ethical language we're adding to this document is already part of their professional license. But I must say, I'm not sure the Board of Elections use a certifying individual, or they just use agencies.
Yeah, Lillian, that's a great point. But I don't see that there's a requirement unless I'm missing it, in the text of what we're being presented. It doesn't require that they be certified by the program that you're referring to, I don't think. Am I wrong about that?
Well, if that's not true, then the courts do not utilize non-certifying individuals. So the language cannot match the court interpreter requirements.
Sorry, folks, I was on mute. So we do not require that folks be certified under the National Council's interpreter certification, but those are ethical standards that we also lean on and expect from interpreters, although they do not need to be certified through that program.
So I noticed that there's on page 4 of the printout that you emailed ahead, and thank you for that. There's a subparagraph B that speaks to minimum qualifications, and it says that the commission, that's us, shall ensure that interpreters have written and spoken fluency in English and the language to be served. How do we accomplish that? Is there a test that they have to take? Is there an option to be, if you are certified under either on one of these nationally recognized programs, is that good enough? I would think it would be, but it's a little unclear what since we're putting the onus on ourselves, or really on Sarah, to make this assurance. How do we deliver on that?
Sorry, Megan, you want to answer, and then I'll chime in?
Of course. So I was going to say that, like we said earlier, this rule sets the baseline. Every interpreter that we bring onto the program will be screened and will be tested in fluency in both English and the non-English language as well. They will be trained prior to every election and then re-screened on a yearly basis. And taking into consideration like any complaints or any just non-professional behavior that is either observed by us, their colleagues, or voters themselves. And like we said earlier, we'll be establishing a protocol for folks using the service to provide feedback on the service as well. Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, so the idea with the rule is just to propose sort of a very general guideline that, as Gavin said, it's kind of like a baseline. And this is essentially saying that we are, as a commission, going to make sure that they have the qualifications needed to do their job. It doesn't necessarily spell out the path that we're going to take to ensure that, because it could happen in different ways. And remember also that this interpreter program, we've nowhere said exactly how we're going to roll it out, right? It could happen through our connecting with interpreters. It could happen through a third party. So we have to sort of keep all of those things in mind. And the city's current interpretation program, which is the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, has been operating, does take interpreter quality into consideration and does make sure through a third party vendor that interpreters are qualified. So this is just saying that we're going to do it. It doesn't say how, if that helps. And then it would be our responsibility and obligation to ensure that if we're going to run a full site interpretation program.
Okay. Okay.
Any other questions or comments before we move towards voting on this? And I mean, you all have you made a couple of points here, and I guess I'm also wondering now if we want to actually propose changes that we vote on and then take that back to see whether it needs to be recertified, or shall we vote on this as it stands, get it posted, and then work on making the changes if we want to make changes, which it sounds like there's some things you want to tweak or edit and add.
If we have questions about using certified interpreters or not, I think that's a major change. So I wouldn't suggest posting it if that's going to be considered. If we don't have a more rigid way to measure for qualifications, then, and if we are going to be the ones, CEC will be the one to determine whether or not it's qualified to do an interpretation, I don't know how we do that as a group when we have many languages to provide interpretation for, and we're not professionals in that field.
Yeah.
Are we going to be leaning on the city? I mean, even the Office of Immigrant Affairs uses consultants. We have to then hire consultants to do this work for us, to screen every time we need to screen someone. Just sounds like a lot of work.
I mean, this is essentially what this rule is doing, is making us responsible to do that, right? Like, to make sure that we are not putting out in the field interpreters who are not qualified. And the way that we get there, you know, to make sure that there are interpreters who are certified is included in this, right? It's a different way of saying it. It's saying that we are going to make sure that they are fluent through using certified interpreters, or if we go directly to the route of using interpreters ourselves, or connecting with interpreters ourselves, hiring interpreters ourselves, or if we're using another vendor, then we would need to make sure that the vendor has this certification and standards in place.
I think that's so much easier. That's what I used to do when I worked for the Attorney General's office. We were not liable for the quality of the interpreter, but the agency that we contracted on the contract in legal language was responsible for the content and quality of interpretation. I think it's really hard to try to do the individual interpreter's qualifications, but that's the job of the agency you end up, hiring to do this work for you.
Exactly.
I think we should change the language to reflect that we will hire or we require a professional agency that will be providing the services for us. I think that's.
I hear your point, and I want to also remind us that during the public hearing, there was also a lot of concern about using third-party vendors, right? So, I think what we're trying to do here is keep the language sort of very general and set, again, as Duggan talked about in the law department, it said this is sort of this sort of baseline standard that would allow us to implement it in different ways, depending on.
The language that we're trying to use for this particular rule is too rigid and legal, and it has high-level requirements that will not be met unless you have an agency who does this work professionally, recruits individuals, screens this individual, and is known and reputable in the business. Look, it's a hard thing to get anyway. As someone who's always out there, screaming interpretation by legal, it is not that easy. And so for you to meet all of the different requirements that everyone wants to have in terms of quality, fairness, equal services, equal treatment for all, I think you cannot be liable. We as a group should not be liable to provide, that service through our own screening process. It's just not going to be. We're not going to be able to.
If I could jump in to address what I'm hearing from Lillian, and if I'm understanding correctly, the language is general enough in minimum qualifications, says that the commission will ensure, and I very much take Chair Sarah's point and Duggan's point that it is actually not in our interest to say how we're going to do that right now. For a couple of reasons, one of which is that let's assume that the best way to do it is what Lillian is proposing, is to hire a competent third-party vendor or outside agency that does this every day for a living. That if we build that into the rule, and then there is an initiative later to have a different approach, we'd have to go back and amend the rule. But if we have a general standard that says we'll ensure, and if it were me, I would say we would take reasonable steps to ensure, but that's just me being weasel-like. That we will ensure that this happens. So we're telling you the result that we're trying to achieve and leaving open the path to that result. I'm persuaded despite my initial concern, I'm persuaded by the response that that's the most efficient way to achieve the result that Lillian is actually probably correct in saying is the path to it. But if we announce the result and not the means to the result, then we can modify and adapt as we go along if a better model comes along or if a competing model comes along. And so I'm persuaded that the language here is good enough, except for my legal words.
So why would a member of the public agree to this rule if they don't know how we're going to reach our goal? If we're not letting them know what we're trying, how we're going to accomplish the kind of interpretation we're trying to get to.
The public is not going to, I doubt the public is going to be scouring the rule. The public's going to be engaging with the interpreter. And so it's our responsibility to make sure that the interpreter we provide to them meets the standards that we want for that service.
I saw that this rule was going to be posted for public comment.
Oh, it will be, for sure.
So if I hypothetically speaking, an ethnic group that is lacking, this services in the community, I will go in and I will check every word to make sure that I get a fair interpretation that's respectful, that meets the highest standards, and that I will be comfortable endorsing.
Well, I mean, I think what we can also do is, leave them in and see what happens in a public comment period. Right? We can, and this might come up because it's also a question that we engage in the public hearing for the proposed methodology.
Yeah.
Rather than, anticipating or seeing that's going to come up, we can just see what happens.
The other point that I wanted to make is, as someone who has experience both, as a bilingual person and someone who had to assist in translating in the middle of an election day because the interpreter was not there, or again, professionalism is huge. Because individuals that they just get picked up because they say they speak the second language, I just don't know that they will meet the standards that we're laying out here. The cultural competency, and I agree with that because I'm Caribbean Latina, is the huge difference between the way I speak Spanish than those that are from El Salvador, Ecuador, Venezuela, you name it. So I think I like the fact that you put the language there to be culturally sensitive. It's a way for you to interpret in a Castilian way that everyone understands, or you can be a little bit more localized to where you're from and then no one will understand what you're saying. So I think what I'm trying to do is raise the bar from what I've experienced in those poll sites where individuals are not even fully bilingual. And I don't know where they get them from. I don't know what the requirements are right now for the Board of Elections, but I don't think they meet all the standards that we're writing about in this proposed rule. And if I want to be part of something that's going to make things better, I want to make sure that we as non-professionals in this field should not be screening these individuals or be responsible for choosing how to screen these individuals. It should be left to the professional agencies that provide these services that are reputable and that on the contract are liable for providing the level of service that, quote unquote, we're talking about here.
Absolutely. William, this is Duggan, and I hear you. And I understand your concern about the mechanism through which we ensure that interpreters are qualified and professional and all of the things that we discussed.
We seem to have lost Duggan.
Oh, sorry, I'm here. I wasn't even touching my computer. I don't know how I went on mute. Sorry, I was just saying that, oh my goodness. I was just saying that I hear you, in terms of identifying the mechanism through which we will screen and recruit interpreters. I think that we're hesitant to very strictly codify that piece. I think we want to maintain a little bit of fluidity. For example, if we work with a third-party vendor, we work with a contractor, that's great. They're reputable, they'll screen, they'll hire, all of those things. The way the rule is written still allows us to do that, But if we codify that we will work with a third-party vendor, in 10 years from now, if the CEC wants to work with perhaps like smaller community-based organizations or language co-ops or other ways to screen folks and recruit folks, it will prevent the future CEC or even us in a few years if we receive enough public comment to change the program. Like, we need to have enough fluidity to change the program while still setting baseline standards for the interpreters. And this will continue to be fleshed out as we create the training in partnership with community-based organizations that we provide to the interpreters. And I hear you on like the CEC not being qualified to screen interpreters. I don't understand Polish. I would not be able to like efficiently judge if someone is like correctly translating what I'm saying into Polish. So we definitely hear you on that. We will not be the ones screening folks. We will be the ones ensuring that these standards are met.
So I'm going to, in the interest of time, since it is 3:30, I think one thing actually I completely left out of the program updates piece, which we are going to see, I guess, or was this later on the agenda? I can't even remember now. But we are supposed to be doing a roundtable with community stakeholders around the training, and we'll make sure that you're invited to that so you have a better sense of what we're thinking about putting into the training for interpreters, and can, we can build the training content. I think that we have to decide right now whether we are going to agree to put this rule up for comment. I've heard from you all a couple of different things. One is some concern around what does this sort of cultural context language actually mean? It's not entirely clear, wanting to see some clarity on that. The other concern was around having some language around respectful conduct towards people who are receiving interpretation. And the third concern was around the process of making sure that interpreters are indeed qualified to provide interpretation. So the question that I'm posing here is that if we want to see changes in this rule, the proposed rule, I still believe that we can put it forward as a proposed rule and make the changes that would then go into, the next round, if you will. We never did get to hear about the CAPA process, but what does happen after public comment is the rule gets revised and has to get recertified if there's, before it gets finally posted. So I think there's an opportunity here for us to start that process, and I guess I just want to hear from you all if you're okay with that. If you're not okay with that and you prefer to hold on that, we can do that as well. The reason why we're doing this, even though our deadline is suspended, is that in the event that we do have to do in-person interpretation in November, we will need to have this rule in place in order to get the interpreters to provide the in-person interpretation. So we're just trying to, working backwards from November, thinking about, our meetings and all of that in summer and everything, just trying to lay the process down so that the rule does get revised and finalized before, in order for us to make sure we're recruiting the interpreters if the election happens, in person in November. Is that making sense?
Yeah. So it sounds to me, if I could jump in, it sounds to me like there's going to be public comment and an opportunity to amend after the public comment. So I would be comfortable with going forward with this as the posting now, and then revisiting the comment that I had and the comments that the others had about amendments to the proposed rule at that time instead of now, if that's an acceptable way to proceed. So that's just for me. I would be comfortable voting on this now, reserving the opportunity to have further comment later.
Is anyone uncomfortable with that? Because I do think, I do think that makes sense to do given the timeline that we're working with, and just trying to anticipate that we will need to provide in-person interpretation in November. I just want to make sure that we're ready, to do that. And I think getting us started with just getting it posted will help that timeline.
I'm okay with that as long as we can revisit it.
Yeah. There's ample opportunity to revisit and change the language here if people really, and it sounds like there's certain changes you'd like to see made, so.
Hi, yeah, I also want to say I think we should proceed.
Okay.
So why don't we vote and...
So do I.
Awesome. So, let's just go forward with the vote. And what I'd like to do here, again, as we did last time, because of this meeting format online, I prefer to just do a roll call on the proposed rule. So if you're okay with us posting it, please say yes. If you're not, say no. So Chuck, Atelian left. Morad. So the vote is: are you okay with us posting this proposed rule?
Yes.
Eve?
Yes.
Ollie's not here. Amy?
Yes, sorry.
Mark Diller?
Yes.
Lori?
Yes.
Donna?
Yes.
Okay, I think Anthony is not here. He had to leave. Jose?
Yes.
Linda?
Yes.
Lillian?
Yes.
Anetta?
Yes.
Anastasia?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. All right, so we have now approved to, go forward with posting this proposed rule, and we will begin to take in public comments. It'll be out for 30 days. There will also be a public hearing. We will give you information about that hearing. Obviously, you will be part of it, where we'll get to hear about what people have to say about it, and so we'll take back your comments and see how we can further modify the language. So I'm going to turn now to see if we have anyone signed up or interested in making comments. Francis, are you back with us? I don't know. So do we know who's hosting the meeting?
It looks like Wendy's hosting the meeting.
So, are you just able to take, sorry, say that again?
Sarah, I'm on Francis's behalf. This is Wendy, so I can unmute to anybody who wants to give comments.
Okay, did anyone sign up for comment through text? Do we know? Or let's see something in the chat.
Hey, Sarah, they did not.
Okay, they did not. All right. So no one signed up through text, and no one, it looks like no one's in the chat who wants to say anything. I'm going to invite anyone who is on who, if you'd like to make a comment during this time, please let us know. Okay. Seems like there isn't, doesn't seem to be anybody who would like to comment. Are there any questions? Anything before we, I'm thinking that maybe we can close the meeting if no one has a comment or question.
Sarah, I have a tech-related question. Is there a reason why we're choosing to use WebEx as opposed to Zoom or Microsoft Teams? Because this is the only meeting where I've been asked to use WebEx for, and so far I've noticed that there are a lot more tech issues in terms of muting and unmuting, but also there have been moments where I haven't been able to hear sound, and I know that it's not Wi-Fi on my end, so I just, at least in my experience so far, it seems that there are WebEx tech issues that don't exist on other virtual platforms.
Thanks for that question. Basically, we're using WebEx because it's an approved platform for the city. Anytime we want to use any software, we have to go through a process of getting it approved through Do It and also Cyber. So WebEx is the approved platform for city agencies. So that's not to say we're totally forbidden from using Zoom, but it just makes it easier for the city to manage the cyber issues if it is on an approved platform. So, we should connect with you a little bit more to understand better what concerns or issues you've faced in today's meeting and before, so that we can also relay that and make sure that we're addressing them.
Well, I mentioned it in the chat. I noticed, I think some other people might have been having this issue. I didn't touch my computer at all, and there were several moments where I suddenly realized I was that somebody had unmuted me, even though I hadn't done so myself.
Okay. Well, for the commissioners, by the way, you are all unmuted, right? All of you are not muted by the host. It's only the other participants that are muted by the host until the comment period opens.
No, but
for the commissioners, you're asked to voluntarily mute yourself.
Right, but we were on mute. We had all muted ourselves, but something turned us off of mute.
Oh,
we did not do it.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, so there was a point in the meeting, you heard about peanut butter and children and other things. We were not aware that we had been taken off of mute.
Oh, gosh. Okay, sorry about that.
Right.
Yeah, it might have been the same moment that Francis's computer froze.
Yeah, that's what Amy's exactly right. That's what I was referring to. And for me, there were several moments where I suddenly noticed that was the case, where I was unmuted and didn't realize it.
Okay. Yeah, and that actually happened to me as well. If you recall, there were points you were saying that you couldn't hear me, and I didn't think I had muted myself. So we'll try to figure this out, why that happened. An adventure.
Sarah, I have one.
Yeah, there was a lot of weird things going on in this meeting.
Yes. Someone else?
Yes, it's me. It's Donna. The task force for racial equality and inclusion, are they talking about housing, or just are they talking about businesses and COVID? Because I don't see a housing component to that task force.
There are different, good question. There are different subcommittees, and I think I'm trying to remind myself of what they are. Housing definitely came up. Remember I mentioned that the task force had reached out to stakeholders to do interviews with them, and so there were about 277 stakeholders that were interviewed in these zip codes that are hardest hit. And housing came up as housing and food security were the number one concerns that came up across these interviews. So I'm sure, and I should know this by heart by now, but I don't, there must be a subcommittee that's taking that on. And I will double confirm that with you. Yeah. If it's, and there's another, cause there's a task force on racial equity and inclusion. There are also other advisory groups that have been assembled, by the city, as part of the Fair Recovery Plan. So there's like a variety of different things going on where they're engaging, stakeholders around this. And this is sort of also planning for, there's like a short-term plan and then there's also a long-term plan. So I'm gonna look into your question about who is handling the housing piece of it and get back to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Could you give us a report on that? Because our constituency, and as part of civic engagement, all of those things matter to our community, and in my community especially, that's one of the hardest hit by the COVID. Housing is also very important. So if you can, I would like, just to report on what's going on and what the committee is doing and what are those long-term and short-term plans coming out of this.
I'm actually looking at, since we have a few minutes right now, I can tell you I was able to pull up the subcommittee list for the task force. So it's healthcare access, data and research, delayed healthcare services. So, for example, people aren't able to go and get their dental work done during this time, right? So there's a whole committee that's dealing with that. Food access insecurity is a subcommittee, and housing is a subcommittee of the Racial Equity and Inclusion Task Force. So the co-chairs for that are HPD and DSS. Someone from HPD, Louise Carroll and Luana Kimbrough from DSS are co-chairs on that. There's a job and workforce subcommittee, and there's a mental health needs subcommittee. There's a subcommittee on undocumented workers and families, subcommittee on small business, another subcommittee on social distancing, and the last one is on youth and education. And each subcommittee is charged with meeting at least twice a week, and also holding at least one meeting with external stakeholders. So if you'd like to know a little bit more about the housing subcommittee, I can look into that and see how they're going to be doing.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions around the subcommittees or want more information?
No, I just want to say that I did go to the national, what is this, healthcare, NCIHC.org for their interpretation practices, standards of practice. And they have 32 standards of practice listed.
What's the NCIC? What does it stand for?
NCIHC, which I believe is
the Health Council. Okay, the Health Council. Okay.
And so it looks like some were chosen out of what they have as overarching buckets or categories, like accuracy, standards of practice, impartiality, respect, cultural awareness, role boundaries, professionalism, professional development, and advocacy. So it seems like some were picked out and maybe because a lot of these are specific to healthcare workers. But I think that maybe when looking at the ones that were chosen to try and grab some of the other ideas that were around that specific, that specific one that was chosen. Because there are 32 here, and I think we had 4.
Yeah. I think the effort of the law department was to try to keep things as baseline as possible.
Right.
But it's worth re-looking at that and seeing, what else they want to.
Mark, you might want to look at it. You like these things.
Make your recommendation.
Gee, thanks. I guess is the only way to say to respond.
So if I have to run,
So if no one has any other questions, maybe if somebody would like to make a move to adjourn.
Without objection.
Oh, can someone move to adjourn and then second?
So moved.
Second?
Aye.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Thanks, everybody.
Aye.
Okay, well, so I'll call this meeting to adjourn. And we'll be in touch with you about when the hearing will be and the next meeting, which will be the hearing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Good evening, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Okay.